All right, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Sam Budget Cuts. It is brought to us by Nico Software, which I think is a portmanteau of Neat Corporation, the developer slash publisher of the game. The game is $29.99, and the review copy was provided by the publisher, so thank you for that. I now present my case. Intergenerational leaps are always exciting when it comes to video games. After all, who doesn't love to revisit their former favorite haunts with a fresh coat of paint applied, a couple of new features thrown in, and a slathering of new content? However, what many come to forget is that while technology obviously advances, game design does so as well with time. I recalled salivating at the prospect of Castlevania Chronicles Collection being released on the PlayStation after spending years, maybe a decade, reminiscing about my NES days with that franchise, only for my mouth to abruptly dry up the moment I jumped one pixel too late as Simon Belmont and he overshot the platform, plummeting to his death. Like a woman heading out to meet a blind date only to end up meeting Adam, my heart sank as the reality of the classics sat down and shattered the hopes of my expectations. It's a pitfall that's avoidable with remakes and remasters, but only if you're aware of them. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I present to you Budget Cuts Ultimate, a celebrated VR classic, if indeed VR is old enough to entertain the notion. Who dares to revisit the latest generation of virtual reality? Does it stand the test of time, or does it just barely miss the landing? Let's find out. Budget Cuts Ultimate, we're going to judge you on 3 counts. The first count being mundane in the membrane. Budget Cuts Ultimate is essentially Metal Gear Solid meets Office Space. There's this ironic tension between the mundane and the insane going on in this game. You are a person who works in a standard corporation, and humans are being outsourced, and it appears you're the last human in this company as you're being replaced with robots. You find out that all these people going on vacation or getting fired are actually being killed, and you're trying to escape this corporation before you get found out. So this humor is brought to you in the game with this whole office life motif, people talking about, robots talking about, oh, it'd be great to go on vacation. I love my job. I love going to work. And it's mixed with these murderous robots and stealth assassinations that you're committing, because as you're trying to escape this corporation that wants to hunt you down and kill you within the workspace, there are sentry robots walking around looking for humans to annihilate so they can create an entire robot race. This comedic theme is present throughout. You get these ironic, HR memos spread about and notes that you can read, or things overhead from the CEO that are a bit humorous, and it's charming at first, but it begins to wear thin over time and, of course, over repetition as you hear these things over and over again. Although I will say some of these other elements of the game, it's visually impressive. It's very sharp and clean, I should say. It's not so impressive like Red Matter, but it's very, inoffensive to look at. And the musical score is surprisingly good. Nothing heart-wrenching, but it really sets the mood and the tone for this kind of stealth movement through these environments that you're going for. You're a sneaky dude trying to get out of this big building. So for all that, on the count of mundane in the membrane, I find you guilty. Adam.
I'm curious what type of humor is involved. There's dry humor, there's potty humor, there is outlandish humor, because I like Office Space. That is funny, and that's kind of the humor of, I guess maybe you can classify as dry humor, and maybe I'm taking that metaphor of yours a little too far. How would you classify the humor? Because obviously I feel like a big part of enjoying this game would be appreciating that humor aspect.
I don't know if it's dry or whatever. It does just seem kind of sarcastic. A lot of sarcastic humor. It's not Office Space in terms of humor. It's Office Space in terms of setting of like, man, how horrible is this life where you're in a cubicle for the majority of your life, and the thing you look forward to is donuts in the break room, right? It's that kind of joke. And the robot's talking, a robot slowly dying and talking about how he loves dreams, or he has dreams and he loves working so hard and now he's dead. It's funny like the first time, but it happens every time. And you're going to kill a lot of robots in this process. You're going to throw things a lot of robots who say things robotically like, oh, you are disturbing me while I'm working, coworker. And again, it's interesting the first time you see it, but after that, and I can only read so many memos scattered about that's like a subtle plug at like, oh, we're working so hard, but HR says we can't take vacation and stuff. I get it. It's funny. It's silly, but it kind of wears thin over time.
Cool.
All right. On to the second count. The second count is safety is my middle name. So early generation VR had the limitation where people were afraid, right? They're afraid of how this game's going to get the players to respond. We can't go too fast. We rely on teleportation as locomotion instead of smooth locomotion, snap turning, things like that. We're not trying to climb a lot of things. We're not trying to jump. We certainly don't want to speed the pace up too much. And this is an area where I think Budget Cut suffers a bit. Now, I don't want to move past the fact that they added enhancements to it. On PSVR1, Budget Cuts 1 had only teleportation locomotion. So you have a gun called the Translocator. It shoots out a little marble. And this is actually kind of a clever conceit, given the time the game was made, that you shoot that gun. That's how you teleport. But before you confirm that teleportation, you have a little window you can view, and you can look around to see what's on the other side of that teleportation, which is nice in a stealth game. I want to know what's around that corner before I go around that corner. So I shoot the marble, and then I can look and see what's around the corner before I actually make the leap. That's nice. It doesn't feel good to do it in VR these days. Now that we all have our VR legs, we're all used to walking around. But the game is still designed around that movement because the game wasn't originally designed with the smooth locomotion. And these kind of things can hold the game back now that we've played these games. There's other little elements here, like, we've more or less mastered the art of inventory systems in games. However, this one has one that's just a bit too cumbersome to enjoy what's happening. You have 8 slots of which you can hold things, and so I got to grab things like a coffee mug so I can throw it at a robot to stun him so I can get away. Or you have these knives that you pick up and you throw, and that will just, disable a robot and kill it, and there's oil splattering everywhere. But you can only carry so much. But to transfer from your teleportation locomotion, which you have to do to get through windows and stuff like that, you have to change what your hands are doing. I have to change from a grabber to a teleporter, change from a grabber to a bow and arrow, which I then have to change my other hand to the grabber so I can hold the arrow. You have to change to your scanner tool that you have. So it's problems that have now been solved that weren't solved initially. So kudos to them for devising these clever solutions to resolve these problems, but it just doesn't feel great nowadays. All that being said, the game is a lot of stealth. There's a little bit of puzzle solving here as well. So you're sneaking through these environments or trying to take out these enemies with whatever you have on hand. But the real goal is, like, how do I get from point A to point B? Open this door, find this key, hack this thing so that I can progress. And the puzzles, for the most part, they range from, like, the really simple, like, okay, just find 3 computers and hit a button. But sometimes, like, there's a boss fight with a robot named Adam, which is funny enough. And you can't do anything to him. You don't have any weapons. So you have to figure out, like, a way to navigate through this map while, like, distracting him. But the map they give you is a real map in the game, and holding it, it's just, I have no idea how to conceptualize where I am in this map space. And it just feels like something that could have been done better. Resident Evil 8 does it better. It shows me where I am on the map, which wouldn't make sense in the context of this game, but we don't necessarily need full context. So the game plays it safe. Everything it's doing, it's playing it safe because it was designed around last gen. And for that reason, on the count of safety is my middle name, I find Budget Cuts Ultimate guilty.
It's a little disappointing for me to hear that, especially with it being moved to the PSVR2 and things of that nature. But I don't really have a question. I would be curious to see how this has impacted your final verdict. But at this time, I think I'm just going to listen and let you continue.
All right, on to the third count, the count of hiding in plain sight. Now, this game is a stealth game. Stealth games are really hard in VR. I mean, we have games that try to do stealth, and none of them are resounding successes, but this is particularly because stealth games in first person just never really work that well, and this is locked in first person. It's hard to get a bearing about where the enemies are. It's hard to get a bearing about what the environment actually is because you're not overhead like you would be in Metal Gear Solid. You don't have this third person camera to really realize the layout of the environment like you would in something like Splinter Cell or any other stealth game that people come to love. And that is kind of a limitation here. So it suffers for that. I don't know where the enemies are. I don't have enough weapons. I don't know where to find weapons. If I'm looking for a key, I forget where that key was. It's really easy to get turned around. But in sometimes the game does it right. And when stealth is good is when you feel that tension and you succeed. And there were certainly many times when I'm moving through the environment, I get surprised by a robot. I swiftly move away. And the heat is on where I'm racing to a door. I'm racing to find a path. I'm trying to creatively move through this environment and get a solution to the problem on hand. And when that happens, it does happen in the game sometimes. When that happens, it's a total thrill. I feel clever, and the game has presented me solutions that I'm able to quickly process. And that comes down to design, right? And the game's not meant to be gone through quickly, but with smooth locomotion and the way we play games now in VR, we want to move quickly sometimes. So that's one of the issues for me, is just the overall stealth design of a game is a bit difficult. Yeah, and because of that, it just feels like in these elements, last gen comes around, rears its ugly head for us. Although I will say that this game is ultimately a combination of Budget Cuts 1 and Budget Cuts 2 smashed together into one seamless game. And you can, there's a stark difference, when Budget Cuts 2 begins, because the game opens up. It feels a bit more current generation than Budget Cuts 1 did. You suddenly get a bow and arrow, and you get darts, and you can snipe robots from a distance with the dart, although it still is not a stealth game because you have limited ammunition for that bow and arrow. Although I will say, again, maybe this is a last gen issue, the bow and arrow has these crosshairs, and when you line them up and you shoot the arrow, it's like I have a 50-50 chance of that still hitting the enemy, even though I lined them up, I took a breath, I know I'm not shaking, but I still miss, and I just don't quite get it, which really puts a damper on the effort I put into getting myself into a good position so that I could take out the enemy. All that being said, though, I feel like I'm harping on the downsides a lot. You do have this roller coaster ride, like I mentioned in Resident Evil, where you're going from overpowered to underpowered. Sometimes I walk into a room, there's a handful of robots, I have a ton of knives, and I just take them all out. That feels great. Sometimes you walk into a room, you have no weapons, you have no way of taking them out, and you really got to rely on the stealth. I enjoyed that. And when the puzzles do click immediately or relatively quickly, you do feel clever. But there was a lot of times when I got from point A to point B to point C to point D, and I got through it by brute force. I was just kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing how I can get through here, only to realize after the fact, oh, that was how I was supposed to solve this puzzle. That was how I was supposed to get here. Which, sure, it's a clever design, but it's not well presented to the player in a sense that you feel like you're taking part of that accomplishment. It's the developers have made a cool layout, but you don't get to enjoy it because you're too busy just kind of scratching your head trying to figure out what's going on. So, there's a good game here. But that good game is hiding in plain sight from all of the last gen stuff that you're encountering. So on that count, I find Budget Cuts, on the count of hiding in plain sight, guilty.
Was with the stealth aspects, were you ever tempted to quit playing because it was annoying because of the stealth, or was it manageable?
Yeah, there were times where it's just like, it feels like stealth that wasn't designed entirely around stealth. It's almost like in some situations they want, like the only way they expect me to get through this is by disabling a robot or having some weapons on hand. But if I don't have weapons on hand, it's really hard to figure out like, okay, how am I supposed to get there other than hoping I can launch this teleporter across the map and get there just quickly before anybody turns around. And I don't really like that kind of troubleshooting method of approaching a stealth game. So yeah, there were times, certainly last time I played it, just got frustrating. It's like, obviously I'm missing something here. I'm just going to stop and come back tomorrow.
Cool. Final verdict time.
All right, final thoughts. Neat Corporation has made a fine port of the original game and brought its better, stronger, and handsomer brother with it. The game has plenty of meat on its bones in terms of length, as it's effectively two games seamlessly combined into one, with the latter half being an obvious but welcome improvement over the first. But even then, the mechanical limitations of early VR games rears its head at times, reminding you that this game, this design, is not for this generation. And that's okay, because many haven't experienced budget cuts in the PSVR ecosystem, and anyone stuck in the PSVR ecosystem definitely hasn't even heard of the sequel to Budget Cuts. So it's a new game for us. And if your interest is piqued in trying your hand at one of the first polished and complete games of yesteryear, you now have a valid and valuable choice in front of you for what you could go for. And this is a bit odd, Adam. I don't know where I'm standing on this game right now, but I think my ultimate choice is that I find Budget Cuts ultimate guilty.